looks like the end of the world, some people still apparently have to mow the lawn. One Oregon man says he likes to keep his yard nice, especially now as wildfires surround the area, because as he puts it, in case the Lord decides to take it. Meanwhile, other residents across the West are facing evacuations as multiple wildfires over recent days have now turned deadly. The governor of Oregon says 5 towns have burned to the ground. President Trump, meanwhile, defending his recorded comments to Bob Woodward, admitting to downplaying the dangers of the coronavirus. Our Jonathan Karl asking the president,
why did you lie to the American people, and why should we trust what you have to say now?
Such a terrible question.
Meanwhile, President Trump again urging schools to reopen for in-person learning. And for the second time in 2 days, reports of a teacher dying of COVID-19. Our network-wide series Turning Point. And tonight, a closer look at how Asian Americans have been hit especially hard by unemployment since the pandemic began. Has racism played a role? And for tonight's NFL kickoff, 16,000 fans in the stand amid a bizarre milestone that has nearly every pro sports league all competing on the same day. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. We begin with those apocalyptic scenes in the West. Hundreds of wildfires burning from Texas to Alaska, but the brunt of it in California, Oregon, and Washington, and the death toll is only rising. First responders are overwhelmed. Sheriff's deputies seen here racing across narrow, charred roadways, barely able to see through the heavy soot and the smoke in the air. Entire neighborhoods and towns have burned to the ground, like the town of Talent, Oregon, where so many homes have been overtaken by the flames and intense heat. Oregon's governor says it could be the greatest loss of life and property due to wildfires in the state's history. Matt Gutman leads us off with some of the horrifying accounts from the survivors of the flames.
Oh my God.
Tonight, survivors of that explosion of wildfires in the West offering a glimpse inside.
Half a Talent is going to be gone. At least half the city.
Just 24 hours after the governor warned of the state's greatest loss of life, the death toll is growing tonight. Southeast of Salem, Oregon, Chris Tofty frantically trying to reach his family during the evacuation.
I drove through some pretty big flames, I was in the flames, engulfed in my car. I can't believe the tires didn't pop or something, you know?
After that interview, the family says searchers found the bodies of his 12-year-old son, Wyatt, and Wyatt's grandmother, Peggy. The fires in the Medford area destroyed about 600 homes. This lone house, a reminder of a neighborhood obliterated.
From up here, you don't only get a sense of the scale of the destruction, but also an entire landscape bleached of color. This is a sea of gray and ash and twisted metal.
In another neighborhood, Tim Engelhardt took us with him to see if his home was still there. With landmarks gone, the neighborhood unrecognizable.
A friend of ours had a house here, a couple friends, and it's so destroyed I can't even find where it was.
He was with his daughters and grandson, picking through the wreckage.
I'm so surprised that the people was able to get out of here alive.
His grandson Andre finding his prized possession, a light-up keyboard he'd earned himself.
This is just a special, it was a special gift, personal gift that he got for learning to ride his bike. So, yeah. Great. But guess what? Remember what we said, it's what? Replaceable, right?
Yeah.
Right, okay. So we can hang on to it, we'll make something cool with it, right?
Yes.
Okay.
In California, the fast-moving Bear Fire among the nearly 30 major fires burning in the state. Our Kaylee Hartung is in Butte County.
These wildfires have burned a record 3 million acres this year alone. That's more than 26 times what had burned by this point last year. Fire crews are stretched thin. Some have been working nonstop for nearly a month.
With 3 months still to go until the end of wildfire season, this year has already produced historic destruction. In Washington, fire claiming the life of a 1-year-old boy and badly burning his parents. 600,000 acres burned the past 3 days alone. The town of Malden nearly burned to the ground, the governor pointing to climate change.
We talk about this as a wildfire. I think we have to start thinking they're more climate fires. They're climate fires because that's what creates the conditions that makes them so explosive.
Matt Gutman joins us now from Oregon. And Matt, for people who are now able to return to their homes, what kind of scene are they actually going back to?
an apocalyptic one, Lindsay. You can see behind me, there's literally nothing left. So what they come in with is what they have, because the only things that we've seen people take out of here are ceramic figurines. The fire burned so hot here that it actually pulverized rock and stone. And with this live drone image, I want to show you just the sweep of the devastation here. You know, sometimes you see one burned house or two, but this goes on street after street, block after block, incinerated entire developments, pretty much devastation as far as the eye can see. And it's not just this town, but there are 5 towns in Oregon that have essentially been obliterated, wiped off the face of the earth. This one is called Phoenix. And the residents with whom I've spoken say they don't know if this town is going to be able to rise from the ashes. There's so little left and not much to go back to. So it's going to be a very difficult few months for folks here. Lindsay.
Really hard to wrap your mind around the gravity of the situation there for so many. Matt Gutman, thank you so much. And we will, of course, have more on how climate change has been fueling this intense wildfire season in It's Not Too Late with Ginger Z coming up later on in the show. And turning now to Washington, where the president came before the cameras at the White House today to defend his own words to journalist Bob Woodward. The president was recorded in an interview in early February saying that COVID was deadlier than the seasonal flu and that it spread through the air. Weeks later, though, he said it was like a little flu and that it would go away quickly. Our Jonathan Karl pressing the president today on how different what he said in private was from the statements that he made to the American public. Here's our chief White House correspondent, Jonathan Karl.
President Trump tonight insisted he did not lie to the American people, despite what he told Bob Woodward about intentionally playing down the threat posed by coronavirus.
I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes, sir.
Because I don't want to create a panic.
On February 7th, he told Woodward the virus was more deadly than the worst flus.
It goes through air, Bob. That's always tougher than the touch. You know, the touch, you don't have to touch things, right? But the air, you just breathe the air. That's how it's passed. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus.
3 weeks later, he told the American people something different.
But that's a little bit like the flu. It's a little like the regular flu that we have flu shots for. I really think, Doctor, you want to treat this like you treat the flu, right? And, you know, it's going to be fine.
Today, I asked him to explain. Why did you lie to the American people, and why should we trust what you have to say now?
Such a terrible question, and the phraseology, I didn't lie. What I said is we have to be calm, we can't be panicked. And your question, the way you phrase that is such a disgrace. It's a disgrace to ABC television network. It's a disgrace to your employer. And that's the answer. Are you ready? Because I love. Of course I didn't. Of course I didn't.
No. Deadlier than the flu, and then you went out and told the American public that this was just like the flu.
Let me tell you something. We've had flu years.
You told everybody else something else.
No, and 5 times, right? 5 times. You ever hear the expression 5 times? We've had flu years where we lost 100,000 people. The flu is a very serious problem for this country also. So, but just so you know,
this is worse than the most deadlier than the most strenuous flu.
Okay.
And then you went out and said it's just like the flu.
What I went out and said is very simple. Listen, what I went out and said is very simple. I want to show a level of confidence, and I want to show strength as a leader, and I want to show that our country is going to be fine one way or the other.
So you won't downplay it again? You won't downplay it again, because you said you downplayed it. That's what you told me.
All I'm doing is, no, I don't want to jump up and down and start screaming death, death, because that's not what it's about. We have to lead a country.
The president then tried to deflect blame to Woodward.
If Bob Woodward thought what I said was bad, then he should have immediately, right after I said it, gone out to the authorities.
This is the tragedy. A president of the United States has a duty to warn. The public will understand that, but if they get the feeling that they're not getting the truth, then you're going down the path of deceit and cover-up.
For his part, Joe Biden is saying the president's mishandling of the pandemic has cost American lives.
You saw what Columbia Medical School pointed out in March. Had he acted 1 week earlier, there'd be over 31,000 more people alive. He waved a white flag. He walked away. He didn't do a damn thing. Think about it. Think about what he did not do. and it's almost criminal.
Now from the White House, John, quite an exchange there with the president. He also made another comment today that we're, quote, rounding the corner on the pandemic, something that he has said before. What do you make of that? Is he again downplaying the threat?
It sure seems that way. In fact, he also made it clear that there would be no more shutdowns. He at one point even said, expert or not, meaning regardless of what the experts say, we would not see another shutdown like we saw in this country in March and April. And you see he is moving forward full speed ahead with his rallies. The images that we already see coming in tonight from Michigan, where he will be speaking, are really something else. A very large outdoor gathering, lots of people, very few masks, and almost certainly a violation of state law there. The Michigan state law right now says that outdoor gatherings of more than 100 people are banned. It looks like certainly a heck of a lot more than 100 people there.
And most of them do not appear to be wearing masks either.
No. And, you know, he dealt with this in the campaign dealt with this in Nevada. They were supposed to have rallies in Las Vegas and in Reno, and local officials came out and just flatly said, you know, no, these are not permitted. Not rallies like that.
Jonathan Karl from the White House. Thanks so much, John.
Thank you, Lindsay.
And staying in Washington now, 24 hours after a whistleblower claimed the Trump administration took steps to suppress intelligence about Russia's meddling in the U.S. election, the Treasury Department has accused 4 men of trying to influence U.S. voters on behalf of Russia. One of the accused is a Ukrainian who has worked with Rudy Giuliani to undermine Joe Biden. Here's ABC's Chief Justice correspondent Pierre Thomas.
Tonight, stunning new accusations against a Ukrainian lawmaker seen here meeting with the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani.
My goal here is just one simple goal, and that is to defend the President of the United States individually against the original false charges of Russian collusion.
The Treasury Department today sanctioning Andrei Derkach, claiming that he'd been an active Russian agent for over a decade, who maintained close connections with Russian intelligence services.
It is truly alarming that the president's personal lawyer is working closely with a known Russian agent with ties to Russian intelligence.
According to the Treasury Department, in recent months, Derkach has been trying to illegally undermine the 2020 U.S. election. Authorities say this past spring, Derkach released a series of heavily edited audio tapes designed to interfere in the U.S. presidential race. Some of the tapes attempted to smear Democratic candidate Joe Biden and his son Hunter. Today, the Treasury Department accusing Derkach of spreading false and unsubstantiated narratives about U.S. officials. In addition to Derkach, 3 Russians with alleged links to a troll farm that tried to interfere in the 2016 election were also hit with sanctions.
Lindsay, we reached out to Giuliani today for comment on these allegations relating to Derkach. So far, he has not responded.
Our thanks to Pierre for that. And we are joined now by Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland. Thank you so much, Senator, for joining us.
Lindsay, it's great to be with you.
So Pierre Thomas just reported on the U.S. announcing sanctions against 4 Russian-linked individuals for attempting to influence our election. The administration has been accused of trying to downplay the threat from Russian interference. But do these sanctions show that they're actually taking it seriously?
Not really. If they were really taking it seriously, they would endorse the bipartisan legislation that Marco Rubio and I have introduced. It's called the Deter Act. And rather than simply slap the risk of a few Russian individuals who may be involved in interference, it would say up front to Vladimir Putin and Russia, if we catch you interfering in our elections again, there will be serious economic penalties to pay, including sanctions against your banking sector, against your energy sector. That would show some seriousness on the part of the Trump administration, but they have actively opposed that bill. In other words, they've opposed a bill to say to Vladimir Putin, if we catch you again, there will be very serious consequences, which tells me that they're not serious. In fact, they're willing to allow this interference to continue.
And turning now to the economic impact of the pandemic, Democrats today blocked passage in the Senate of a pared-down $300 billion GOP stimulus bill. Senator McConnell said in an interview after the vote, what part of this bill are they opposed to? What they are saying is we won't pass things that we are even in favor of unless you give us trillions more. Now, I know Democrats argue this bill didn't come close to meeting the country's needs, but do you stand by Senator Schumer and Speaker Pelosi's insistence that they will not negotiate further unless Republicans come up to over $2 trillion in spending?
Well, there were two problems with this bill. One is that it was completely inadequate to the needs of the moment and the national emergency we face. It was really paltry, and in fact, they're moving in the wrong direction compared to where the Trump administration was just a few weeks ago. But it's worse than that. They also have provisions in here that would penalize public schools that, for safety reasons, have decided not to return students to the classroom to the extent that Republican senators like. They actually create dangerous incentives for schools now to open, even if they think it's unsafe, because that will give them more money. That is a very dangerous move, and it's coupled with a provision that actually would allow millionaires to get tax breaks to pay for their sons and daughters to get private tutoring. So they shortchange public schools, they create dangerous incentives for schools, and then they give tax breaks to millionaires to privately tutor their children. That is not what the American people are looking for.
But as you well know, speaking of the American people, many are hurting right now. Why is it not worth negotiating at a lower level that Republicans may support to at least get some relief to Americans who so desperately need it, especially for the schools and small businesses and those who are unemployed?
Well, I think we've made it very clear that we're willing to come down from the numbers that were in the House-passed HEROES Act. And, you know, by the way, Mitch McConnell and Senate Republicans just let that sit on the Senate calendar for 4 months before even beginning to take action. When they finally took action in the Senate, Mitch McConnell has not said, okay, Democrats, what's your proposal? He took this unilateral action. It was a political ploy to give his senators, especially those who are in tight re-elections, political cover so they can point to something, even though it's totally inadequate. We have said all along, Lindsay, that we are willing and want to negotiate an emergency relief package that meets the moment for the American people. This has no funds for rental assistance, no funds for frontline workers in states and municipalities. It has no money for a whole category of things that Republican senators themselves, many of them, have said need help. So we are more than willing to reach a resolution that meets the needs of the American people.
So as we sit here tonight, would you say that any economic stimulus effort that both sides can agree on is effectively dead until after the election in November? And if that's the case, how do you think that voters will react to that as they're considering who to send back to Congress?
No, I certainly hope it's not effectively dead. I hope that we can get back to the negotiating table. I hope Mitch McConnell will come to his senses. I hope he will stop playing politics and actually put some ideas forward, working with Democrats, that will meet the emergency that the moment requires. Look, we've witnessed a White House now that has failed to meet the moment since the very beginning, even though we now know the president knew about it. And Mitch McConnell and Senate Republicans have been complicit in doing nothing. I mean, it was Mitch McConnell who said just a little while ago, you know, there's no rush, there's no urgency here. And if you look at what they put forward today, it shows he still doesn't think there's a lot of urgency. We do, and we are more than willing and have expressed that multiple times to come to an agreement on something that will really help the country and meet the moment. I hope we get right back to it. I do think that it's important that the country receive additional relief, and that's what the HEROES Act did. But it doesn't have to be the HEROES Act, but it has to be something meaningful.
Senator Van Hollen, we thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you coming on.
Good to be with you. Thanks.
And now to the economic devastation of COVID-19 and a look at how city budgets across America are cratering. Congress is still gridlocked over a new economic relief bill to support the unemployed and struggling small businesses. Today, the Senate failed to advance a $300 billion Republican plan. House Democrats passed a competing version last month, but negotiations between the parties remain at an impasse, leaving dozens of local governments with tough decisions about cuts to services and even potential bankruptcies. Here's ABC's Devin Dwyer.
After COVID blew up their budgets, cities and states nationwide are bracing for a wave of deep cuts.
That means laying off workers. That means cutting programs to, particularly to underserved communities and to households that are under a lot of financial stress. They have no options here. They have to cut.
The coronavirus recession eviscerating the revenue that local governments need to keep essential services going.
That's emergency responders. That's healthcare workers, that's fire, that's police, that's teachers, all the things that we rely on at any time. But, obviously during a crisis like this pandemic, we rely on those workers more than we ever have before.
Nearly all U.S. cities from Seattle, Washington to tiny Fairfield, Alabama, facing rapidly growing budget deficits. A new analysis finding many communities likely to lose 10% or more in revenue because of the pandemic.
There are going to have to be some painful choices that are made, and everything has to be on the table, including the potential for layoffs. That's a conversation that we've just begun with our friends in organized labor.
Chicago staring down a $1.25 billion deficit, jobs now in jeopardy for countless city workers. Los Angeles declaring a fiscal emergency, already furloughing 15,000 workers, including its own mayor.
So the furloughs apply to us as elected officials and to all civilian employees, including those who work in our office. So yes, I donated 2 months of salary earlier this year during the pandemic.
In New York City, officials face a $9 billion shortfall over the next 2 years.
If they don't provide state and local funding, it will be financial chaos. The deficit is so large that we would have to do everything. We'd have to cut the budgets, and cutting the budgets hurts, especially now.
Spending cuts likely in cities in blue states and in red ones. Orlando, Jacksonville, New Orleans, and Oklahoma City among those projected to see the biggest drop in revenue from COVID-19. Residents struggling too. Half or more of the households in America's 4 largest cities report major financial problems, and about 20% say they're struggling to afford food. Cuts considered by local leaders would hit those families hard. Libraries, rec centers, parks, schools, and public transit. New York City's MTA, a vital lifeline for millions, announcing plans to reduce service by up to 40% if they don't receive $12 billion in relief. State governments, which give aid to their cities, are expected to be cash-strapped for years. Some project state budget shortfalls will total more than $500 billion between now and fiscal year 2022. And many economists say only the federal government has the resources to cushion the blow and stabilize city and state budgets.
There's no good choice here, right? I mean, we can borrow the money to provide that support, help people now, and then deal with the larger budget deficits and debt down the road on the other side of the pandemic. Or we can do nothing, sit on our hands, which means the people are going to struggle, the economy is going to get weaker. And the least bad choice, in my view, is step up, provide that support, make sure that, the people understand the government has their back, and we can try to get out of this together as fast as possible.
Congress has passed unprecedented financial relief since the pandemic began, but Democrats and Republicans are gridlocked over how much more money to give. Aid for cities and states is at the center of the debate.
Senate Republicans are nervous about the large budget deficits and debt that's accumulating. I do think they're very reticent to give money in particular to state and local government. Some Republicans also think the economy is doing well enough. It's not great, obviously, but it's doing well enough that it doesn't need the additional support. They're not listening to economists like me tell them that, yeah, we need the help.
And while city bankruptcies are rare, economists worry more could be on the horizon, resulting in higher local taxes and fees and reduced public services, a prospect that has millions of Americans closely watching and waiting for Congress to act. For ABC News Live, I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington.
Our thanks to Devin. Of course, the tragic human toll is staggering. More than 191,000 lives have been lost, and now the CDC is predicting a new milestone. It comes while the return to the classroom has turned deadly. We've learned of at least 6 teachers now dying of COVID. Our Victor Akendo has more.
As schools scramble to make classrooms safer, teachers losing their own to the virus. 34-year-old Ashley DeMarinis was getting ready to welcome her students back outside St. Louis when she got sick. Her sister Jennifer, an ICU nurse from New York, was by her side.
It's definitely hard knowing what could or what will happen and then have it happen to your own family.
In Mississippi, students shaken after losing beloved history teacher Thomas Slade.
It's like a gut punch, really. He was a man I respected. I look forward to him coming back to the classroom, you know? And then he was gone.
At least 6 teachers dying from the virus in recent weeks. The country inching closer to a once unthinkable toll. 200,000 lives. The CDC now projecting up to 217,000 deaths by October 3rd.
I just think we need to hunker down and get through this fall and winter, because it's not going to be easy. We know every time we lift restrictions, we get a blip. I mean, it's whack-a-mole.
The race to stop the spread playing out on college campuses. At Miami University of Ohio, cases climbing by 1,000 in just 2 weeks. Officers there breaking up a house party with 20 people after students tested positive for COVID-19.
There's an input on the computer that you tested positive for COVID?
Yes.
When was this?
This was a week ago.
Are you supposed to be quarantining?
Yeah, that's why I'm at my house.
6 students cited with violating health orders.
You see the problem? How many other people have COVID?
They all do.
Everybody has it?
In an interview with our affiliate WTVD, Dr. Deborah Birx urging all college students to get tested.
Most importantly, to every student out there, please get tested.
Tonight, as the NFL kicks off its new season in Kansas City, new rules. The stadium will be at 22% capacity. Fans will be in masks at all times. Tonight, the Miami Hurricanes play their first game of the season. Everyone inside the stadium is required to wear a mask, and they're only allowing 13,000 fans inside compared to the 65,000 that Hard Rock Stadium can usually hold. No students will be allowed for the first 2 games as they try to control the spread on campus. Lindsay?
Victor, thanks so much. When we come back, the disturbing images revealed earlier today of an incident that began with an officer's taser and ended as a deadly shooting. Word today that 4 police officers involved have been fired. The alarming new study about the state of our planet and the life on it. Why the situation looming for all of us is being described as catastrophic. But up next, our series Turning Point, why Asian Americans within months went from the most employed ethnic group to one of the hardest hit in terms of unemployment, and how racism may play a role.
They say Montana is like no place on earth. People come here to relax, unwind, or even just disappear.
In America, you've got to earn respect.
I'm the boss. This is my town.
They're going to war with us.
We'll kill them all.
There's a big fish out there.
We're the future. They're the past. They just don't know it yet.
Fargo, September 27th on FX. Next day, FX on Hulu.
Friday nights, 9/8 Central. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt. True crime, 2020. Friday nights, 9/8 Central on ABC.
Welcome back, everyone. We've reported on how the pandemic has disproportionately impacted people of color in this country, especially among Black and Hispanic Americans. But Asian Americans, traditionally considered more economically secure than other minority groups, have taken a huge hit since the pandemic hit America's shores. So ABC's Kira Phillips set out to examine what's behind the economic fallout for Asian Americans as part of our month-long network-wide series, Turning Point, examining the so-called racial reckoning now sweeping the nation.
Jefferson Lee defines the American dream. The son of Chinese immigrants, his parents worked hard to build this butcher shop in New York City's Chinatown. But now this Coast Guard reservist is coming back home to help the family business survive amid a global pandemic that's been killing Asian American-owned businesses. Lee's parents speak little English and came to the U.S. solely to provide a better life for their children. But this pandemic has hurt first-generation immigrants and their businesses in ways like never before.
As parents, they always tell us, we're doing it so that you don't have to do it and you can get a better job and you can have a better future.
And while Asian families like the Lees continue to barely hang on, the president continuing to tout positive trends for job numbers.
As you probably see, the numbers are terrific.
But not for many minorities. They remain the hardest hit economically. And for Asian Americans as a whole, their jobless rate has spiked to record levels. It's a drastic change from before the pandemic, when Asian Americans had the lowest unemployment across the board at just 2.5%. Fast forward to now, where Asian American unemployment stands at 10.7%, with only Black Americans at a higher rate. And what critics call racist rhetoric from the White House likely hasn't helped.
Some important developments in our war against the Chinese virus. We continue to make progress in our fight against the China virus.
The backlash over the origin of the coronavirus, making a recovery for Asian-owned businesses like the Lees nearly impossible.
National leadership kept referring to it as the Chinese virus or the China virus or whatnot. And of course, with that kind of name, Chinatown and the people that live and work here do get associated with it.
Now, a new report revealing just how detrimental the rhetoric and lack of recovery has been on the Asian American community.
Our data suggests that Asian Americans are hampered across the entire country, whether it's on the East Coast, the West Coast, the Midwest.
Harrison Lung is one of the authors of that report, a partner at the consulting firm McKinsey that has been researching and analyzing the statistics around the impact of COVID-19 on Asian Americans.
When we looked at the data, there has been outsized impact on this community.
Families like the Lees are just one of nearly 2 million Asian American small businesses across the country that employ more than 3.5 million people, but many of them still struggling to access financial relief.
Our analysis should suggest about 75% or 3/4 of these businesses are not eligible due to the lack of relationship with financial services institutions.
On top of that, the language barrier. The Small Business Administration website doesn't have options for Asian languages. And as for the federal government's PPP, or Paycheck Protection Program, its website only has documents in some Asian languages. Bottom line, no communication, no cash. Those struggles not isolated to financial relief.
We have heard that people feel like the Asian American community has largely been ignored in the COVID public health response, specifically that there are not linguistically and culturally appropriate materials or enough ethnic media outreach to really help the community understand what are the prevention measures that need to be taken and what are some of the unique considerations that might be affecting different Asian American communities.
Asian Americans are also overrepresented in jobs considered to be essential. The same job markets hit hardest by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Those in food services industries, restaurants, laundromats, as well as salons. These jobs right now, as you can see within the Chinatown here, has been tremendously impacted.
And that impacts all of us. Asian American businesses represent more than 25% of food and accommodation services, like restaurants and hotels, more than 15% of retail, and nearly 13% of all healthcare businesses.
Many of us are healthcare workers, and what happens is that we're exposed to community-acquired infections, and we bring it home to our families, our very vulnerable family members.
Fear, also a factor for many Asian American businesses. Just ask Irene Sukata Simonian. Her gift shop in Los Angeles, California's Little Tokyo was able to access federal relief, but she was apprehensive about reopening her business so soon.
There were so many unknowns, but the customers were as well. You know, they also are not 100% sure how safe it is to be out and about.
And those who have secured aid say those funds are just barely enough to keep their businesses afloat.
In many cases, they're still losing money, but they're only making the loss smaller by working harder and harder. And that's a hard thing to do, you know, to work hard and you're still losing money.
So what now? Well, for many of these families, they have no choice but to fight to make ends meet. Their legacies and heritage trapped in the brick and mortar of businesses they've built from scratch. And for children of immigrant parents like Jefferson Lee, who refuses to give up on his American dream.
I'm hopeful. You know, I guess I'm the young blood here, so I'm here trying to make it work.
Our thanks to Kira for that. And still ahead here on Prime, the officers accused of smashing through the door to serve a warrant, only it wasn't the right door. The homeowner of retired police officer who is speaking out tonight. The mother facing charges connecting to the deaths of her 2 children in Idaho faces a judge. History made on Wall Street, the first female CEO of a major American bank. How many women now run Fortune 500 companies? But first, our tweet of the day on this World Suicide Prevention Day, a reminder from the Lifeline. There is always someone here for you if you're struggling with tough thoughts or emotions. 1-800-273-TALK. We'll be right back.
In times like these, the news-making events happen here. ABC News.
President Trump meeting face-to-face with one of the world's most brutal dictators, Kim Jong-un.
The president.
You trust him? I do trust him, yeah. I think he trusts me, and I trust him.
Ivanka Trump.
I have to ask you about your emails. Your father had taken Hillary Clinton to task for this.
There just is no equivalency.
So the idea of lock her up doesn't apply to you?
No.
Comey.
How strange is it for you to sit here and compare the president to a mob boss?
Very strange.
Michelle Obama.
What do you wish you could tell your pre-White House self?
Whew. Melania Trump.
Do you think there's still people there that he can't trust?
Yes.
Still working now?
Yes.
Michael Cohen.
So he's still lying?
Yes.
It's a big statement.
And now, in a year with so much on the line, we're right there.
Good evening tonight from Washington, a very busy news night.
America's #1 news source, ABC News, straightforward.
Welcome to Disney Plus. Are you ready? Drop in and explore. The action, the adventure, and the originals. There's no limit to what you'll find. These are your worlds. So come on, dive deeper into the universes you love. Wherever and whenever you want them, you'll find them all here on Disney Plus.
Welcome back, everybody. Citigroup made history today by announcing Jane Fraser as its next CEO. She will become the first woman to ever lead a major Wall Street bank and one of the very few female Fortune 500 chief executive officers, which prompted us to take a look by the numbers at just who's running America's largest companies. With the addition of Fraser, 39 women will now lead Fortune 500 companies. That's the highest number on record. But of course, that's out of 500 companies, which means only 7.8% of America's largest corporations are run by women. And only 5 of these companies have black CEOs, a paltry 1%. None are led by black or Latino women. How powerful are these Fortune 500 companies? Well, together, they represent 2/3, that's 66% of the entire U.S. economy, and bring in a combined $14.2 trillion with a capital T in revenue. Still lots more to get to here on Prime. So many connecting the devastating wildfires to climate change. Our Ginger Z takes a deep dive into the science in this week's It's Not Too Late. And the NFL season kicking off right in the middle of the pandemic. 16,000 fans in the stands in one city. What else is on tap? But first, here's some of the trending stories on abcnews.com.
all. This procession of migrants goes back 2 miles.
There is going to be catastrophic damage.
This fire has made a run. You can see those flames shooting up into the sky.
We are on the jam-packed red carpet.
To the right, guys.
So this is the 4th weekend of protest.
Watch ABC News on location for Facebook Watch.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live, the 24/7 streaming news source from ABC News. Breaking news, live events, streaming nonstop. Original breakthrough storytelling from ABC News, National Geographic, ESPN, and it's all designed differently for you to stream straight to any screen whenever you want.
ABC News Live.
Streaming everywhere, right to you. ABC News Live. It's that easy to go there.
Right now, with so much on the line, we all have questions we want answers to. And Tuesday night on ABC, real uncommitted voters will put their questions directly to him. No issue, no question off limits. From the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a state that could swing this election, President Trump faces real voters in a town hall event with George Stephanopoulos, the President and the People, the 2020 special, Tuesday night at 9/8 Central on ABC.
Hundreds of wildfires are tearing through 14 states. Oregon and California seeing much of the devastation. The North Complex fire is growing into one of the largest in California's history, at one point engulfing 1,000 acres every 30 minutes.
California has experienced more acres burned this year to date than any other year for the entire year, and we're only in the first 9 months of the year.
At least 3 people in Oregon have died.
Today, fresh fallout after new audio excerpts obtained by CNN appear to show President Trump admitting to veteran journalist Bob Woodward that his decision to publicly downplay the severity of COVID-19 was intentional.
It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus.
Trump allegedly making those comments on February 7, but here he is just days later.
This is a flu. This is like a flu.
The president confirming he downplayed the virus, insisting today he wanted to project strength and confidence.
I want to show a level of confidence, and I want to show strength as a leader, and I want to show that our country is going to be fine one way or the other. Whether we lose one person, we shouldn't lose any, because this shouldn't have happened.
Your Honor, on behalf of Mrs. Daybell, she enters a not guilty plea to both charges.
In the case grabbing national attention, Lori Vallow pleading not guilty to charges connected to the deaths of her 2 children in Madison County, Idaho. Prosecutors say she helped husband Chad Daybell bury their bodies on his property. The remains found 9 months after they disappeared. Authorities still not revealing how they died. Their trial set for next year. From Houston, a retired police officer is preparing to file a complaint after deputies tried to serve a warrant, breaking through his front door only to find out they were at the wrong door.
The officers are looking for a Curtis Rogers in this house, and there's no Curtis Rogers that lives in this house.
Luis Rodriguez recorded the deputies barging in and forcing his family outside, even though he identified himself and told them they had the wrong house. The deputies did apologize, but Rodriguez says he doesn't want any other family to be treated that way.
Fresh warnings are coming today from the World Wildlife Fund. In its new Living Planet report, it says the wildlife population, from mammals to fish and everything in between, fell 68% between 1970 and 2016. In Latin America and the Caribbean, it's down 94%.
Well, now's your chance to be king of New York with a first-of-its-kind hip-hop auction. The crown Notorious B.I.G. wore for a photo shoot in 1997 is now up for sale. It's expected to go for $200,000 to $300,000. If that's too pricey, you can spice up your wardrobes with Salt and Peppa's Push It jackets, which are likely to sell for about $15,000. Pretty cool. Tupac's Love Letters and Fab 5 Freddy's MTV ring are also up for sale. Sotheby's is hosting the auction next Tuesday.
And now to yet another fatal police encounter. 4 Houston officers have been fired after a deadly shooting in April of a man who appeared to be in mental distress. The fatal shots came when he was kneeling before them. ABC's Marcus Moore now with the latest body camera video and a warning: it is disturbing.
Tonight, a Houston man's final moments captured on dramatic body cameras. Against the glare of flashlights and the throes of chaos, 27-year-old Nicholas Chavez apparently suffering a mental health crisis.
Calm down.
The shooting happened April 21st when officers responded to several calls about a man walking into traffic. The edited down video released tonight by Houston police shows what appears to be Chavez ignoring officers' commands while stabbing himself with a piece of rebar.
Stop cutting yourself, man. Relax.
Chavez repeatedly asking officers to kill him.
Get down.
Video shows officers shooting beanbags, deploying tasers, and shooting him 3 times, still trying to engage him for several minutes.
7 shots fired.
Officers later shoot him again as he tries to get a hold of one of their tasers, firing 21 rounds, hitting him multiple times. Today, Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo confirming 4 of the 5 officers involved in Chavez's fatal shooting have been fired. The mayor's comments tonight signaling the weight of their decision and the toll of law enforcement and a nation in crisis.
No one should conclude that the dismissal of these officers is an indictment on HPD or the 5,300 police officers. But when you are wrong, there are consequences.
Lindsay, there were several sequences of shots, and it was the 21 shots that the police chief says were unjustified. The police officers union has said that those officers were following the policy, their training, and the law. And the DA's office is still investigating whether to bring charges. Lindsay.
Marcus, our thanks to you. And switching gears now to sports and a bizarre milestone brought on by the coronavirus. Today is the first day ever that the NFL, MLB, NBA, WNBA, PGA, LPGA, MLS, NHL, NASCAR, not to mention the U.S. Open, will all play on the same day. Tonight, the NFL also kicks off in its new season, but there is no pandemic bubble. Teams will play games in their stadiums, 5 of them allowing a limited number of fans into the stands. TJ Holmes has more on what this season may look like and the protests expected on the field.
Touchdown, Kelsey. Chiefs are back in. The NFL is back, and it's going to look a lot different from the last time you saw it. The defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs will host the Houston Texans tonight in the first game of the season and the first NFL game amid the global pandemic. The 2 teams will face off at Kansas City's Arrowhead Stadium, one of only 5 stadiums in the league letting fans attend games. But it won't be packed. Only about 16,000 fans will be allowed in. That's roughly 22% of the stadium's capacity. Fans will only be able to park, enter, and exit the stadium in their designated zones. That means no wandering around the stadium. Masks will also be required at all times, even while sitting in or cheering from the seats. The players also following strict guidelines as well, with daily COVID testing and reconfigured locker rooms for better social distancing. There will be no shaking hands or swapping jerseys after the games, no cheerleaders or mascots on the field, and private planes are on standby in case anyone has symptoms of COVID or tests positive.
We also will have contact tracing devices worn by everyone on the field, all players, coaches, and referees. And so we'll have some data, even if we don't have positive tests, about what type of physical distance has been respected throughout the game. Those that are in and around the bench area will also be in masks and face coverings.
Players not willing to risk it were allowed to opt out of the season. At least 66 players have chosen to do so, including Chiefs offensive lineman Laurent Duvernay-Tardif. He was the first in the NFL to announce his decision to opt out. Instead, he'll spend the next few months studying at Harvard.
For the land and of the free.
And 4 years now after Colin Kaepernick sparked controversy by kneeling during the national anthem, his message of racial equality and social justice will be front and center. The NFL painting "End Racism" and "It Takes All of Us" in the end zones, and allowing players to wear helmet stickers and patches featuring the names of victims and messages of support. The league also playing "Lift Every Voice and Sing" before each game this weekend, the song known as the Black National Anthem.
Our thanks to TJ for that. And there's also news tonight on the baseball front. The Major League Baseball playoffs, which are right around the corner, are reportedly headed for a bubble scenario for the final 3 weeks of the postseason. USA Today reports Globe Life Field in Arlington, Texas, the brand new home of the Rangers this season, would stage the World Series and the preceding National League Championship Series. The American League Championship Series would be held at the San Diego Padres Petco Park, according to that report, but a plan has yet to be finalized, pending a deal with the Players Union. And when we come back, what is the actual scientific consensus on what we're seeing with these unprecedented wildfires and other extreme weather events and climate change? Stay with us.
In America, you've got to earn respect.
I'm the boss. This is my town.
They're going to war with us.
We'll kill them all.
There's a big fish out there.
We're the future. They're the past. They just don't know it yet.
Fargo, September 27th on FX. Next day, FX on Hulu.
The waters of the Outer Banks are unforgiving and full of riches for the fishermen who dare. The best of the Northern Fleet are heading south. But the locals know where the giants lie. And if you thought the waters were unforgiving, wait until the battle begins. Wicked Tuna Outer Banks. New episodes Sundays at 9 on National Geographic.
Now could be a good time to have another baby.
Are you crazy? I'm in love with you. Now that I said it out loud, it does sound weird. Please stop. When I see
you were so fine, I had to remind myself to breathe.
When I see you. Let's do this.
How's your quarantine going?
Tell Sassy. I wanted to know it was me.
She was a villain or a hero, depending on your outlook. Dame Diana Rigg, one of the stars of Game of Thrones and so many other shows like the 1960s show, The Avengers and Bond, has passed away. Game of Thrones paying tribute, tweeting, "Be a dragon." Diana Rigg was 82. And as we reported at the top of the show, officials in several states impacted by those devastating wildfires are linking the devastation to climate change. But what does the science say? Our Ginger Z tells us in this week's It's Not Too Late.
Hi, I'm Ginger Z, and it's not too late. I am obviously not in the basement, but made it out in the fire gear to the El Dorado fire in Southern California. You can see the smoke-filled mountainside there, the hot spots that could soon meet Mother Nature's kerosene, the Santa Ana winds. And this is just one of the natural disasters I've been to in the last couple of weeks. Of course, we had the derecho with more than 130-mile-per-hour winds in Iowa. We had Laura, that Louisiana's southwest coast getting slammed by a Category 4 hurricane. And here, now in California, we have well surpassed the 2018 record number of acreage burned. And this year, the most in a single year ever recorded, and we are just reaching peak fire season. So the wildfires aplenty. We had a nightmare evacuation earlier this week in Oregon. You had Washington State with more than 330,000 acres burned in less than 24 hours.
Everything gone. Clothes, beds, everything.
The question I get asked a lot, why aren't you connecting this to climate change? Why aren't you talking about land management?
California, Oregon, and Washington, we are all in the same soup of cataclysmic fire. And the reason we are in the same soup is because the grass is so dry, the temperature is so hot, and the winds are so heavy. And these are conditions that are exacerbated by the changing climate that we are suffering.
Well, let's talk about it now, because at least with wildfires, the connection to climate change is a bit more clear.
We have a longer period of temperatures able to dry the conditions out even further. So it's not that we're necessarily seeing more fires, it's that these fires are able to burn at a larger size with more destruction.
And it's not just wildfires. We are already past the letter P in the Atlantic hurricane names, farther into the alphabet than we've ever been before this early in the season. But at the same time, the way we measure tropical storms has advanced. So some researchers point out that identifying trends really depends on how far back you look. What most climate scientists will agree on is that most of these extremes are happening closer together and for longer periods of time.
We're also seeing a tendency for storms to intensify more rapidly, which is exactly what we saw happen with Laura and Michael and Florence and Harvey. And this is one of the clear signals associated with climate change.
Jennifer Francis has a relatively new theory that connects climate change to extreme events with the jet stream. Let me start you out with the basics. The poles are cold, the equator hot. That big difference in temperature creates an imbalance. So the hotter air is going to move toward the colder air in an effort to equalize. This temperature gradient is divided by something called the jet stream. It's this fast column of moving air way up in the atmosphere. Jennifer's data shows that as the poles warm, the temperature gradient is not as strong. So that leaves the jet to be weaker, more movable, and then gets stuck at times.
The evidence is starting to pile up, suggesting that what we expect to see happen is in fact happening. The westerly, west to east winds of the jet stream, which is the predominant wind direction, are starting to slow down. And it's because that jet stream is tending to take one of these big northward swings and stay in one place over the western states. And then downstream of that, we get just the opposite. That's partly why we're seeing all these wildfires out in California, because that area has just experienced such persistent drought and hot conditions that lead to wildfires.
Other experts say that climate change is impacting extreme weather to some extent, but there just isn't enough evidence yet to say exactly how or how much.
What I can tell you is it's not a theory that has been judged as strong evidence for by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change or other expert assessments. But there's really not, at this point, strong evidence for long-term trends in tropical cyclones worldwide or hurricanes in the Atlantic that can be attributed to greenhouse gases. That doesn't mean that there's no effect. It just means that we're not able to detect it now, or it hasn't emerged yet from the background natural variability.
Whether this has to do with the jet stream being stuck, weaker, blocking patterns setting up, or not, this fire was caused by a gender reveal party. There are certainly things that we as humans can do to make and mitigate these types of storms and to plan for future. When we've got natural disasters like this, we have to think about building code. We have to think about where we build and how we build, the sustainable, permeable surfaces that can attempt to mitigate flooding in something like Harvey or Florence.
One thing that's really important is the whole system is set up to reward people for not being insured. There's no incentive currently put forward by Congress to put forward proper land use planning. And so this cycle only gets worse and worse. And FEMA's not going to be able to keep up. And it's unfair for people to think that FEMA can solve all the problems.
Emergency managers can assure us they're happening more and definitely costing more.
There is a window of time here in which we can make really significant policy changes to make the future a little bit less scary. We are seeing an increase in impacts and especially needs related to disasters across the country. In parts of Texas and parts of Louisiana, North and South Carolina, it's flooding so regularly that people aren't able to get themselves recovered and back on kind of stable footing before the next flood comes. And so we're seeing this like compounding of vulnerabilities in communities across the country.
Part of this is the idea that while an extreme weather event is out of our control, the aftermath, or what we call the disaster, is shaped by our decisions and policies.
These disasters that are unfolding around us all over the country are not inevitable. There are things that we can do to prevent them or at least significantly minimize their impacts.
Montana says that for every $1 the federal government spends on preparing before a storm, they save $6 in response and recovery. So it's a no-brainer.
I'm not the type of person that wants to dictate where Americans can live in this country. But I also think that if you want to live on some of these mountains that are vulnerable to wildfires and oversee the Pacific Ocean, or you want to live down in some of these most vulnerable areas to storm surge, along the coast, you can do that. But don't expect the federal government to come bail you out.
Long, who left FEMA last year, says that this country relies too much on taxpayer money to recover, instead of having insurance or making good planning decisions before a disaster hits.
Really, the good news is we don't need to resolve all the scientific issues to be better prepared. If you live on the Gulf Coast, guess what? You're in the hurricane zone, and you better be prepared. We know San Francisco gets earthquakes, Louisiana gets hurricanes, the Midwest gets tornadoes, the West gets fires. And to be better prepared, that's about all you need to know.
So even if the atmosphere starts to change and the jet stream changes because of what we've done and the difference in that temperature gradient from the pole to the equator, we can make those changes ourselves. And that's what we can control right now, right in our future. And I promise, it's not too late.
The science is really so fascinating. Our thanks to Ginger for that. And before we go tonight, the image of the day. Take a look at this man in Salt Lake City, all sprawled out on a fallen tree 2 days after a massive storm caused widespread damage across Utah. Tens of thousands remain without power and many schools are closed there. But for now, one man able to rest despite this chaotic year. And that is our show for this hour. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us, and good night.